When Prince Harry agreed to appear on Piers Morgan Uncensored, the world braced itself for what many predicted would be an explosive exchange. Both men are known for their strong opinions, turbulent public histories, and a complicated past involving the British media. The stage was set for a powder keg of royal resentment and journalistic bravado. From the moment Harry walked into the studio, there was tension. Dressed simply, exuding calm but tightly wound energy, he shook hands with Piers Morgan with visible restraint. Piers, ever the provocateur, wore a grin that seemed less about greeting and more about anticipating a verbal spar. Millions tuned in live, expecting confrontation but hoping for insight. What they witnessed instead was a fiery breakdown of civility, a public clash of values, in a historic moment that ended with Prince Harry being kicked off the show in real time. Live unscripted and brutally unforgettable. The interview began politely enough. Piers opened with a few standard questions about Harry's charitable work and recent travels, to which Harry responded with poise. But it didn't take long before Piers pivoted toward the elephant in the room, the infamous royal exit, and Harry's ongoing fallout with the British press. "Do you ever regret airing your family's dirty laundry on international television?" Piers asked, his tone pointed. Harry didn't flinch. "I told my truth. Silence wasn't protecting anyone. It was only enabling the institution." Piers leaned in, but at what cost? You walked away from duty, tradition, and loyalty to your grandmother, and let's be honest, many people see that as betrayal. Harry's jaw clenched. "Loyalty goes both ways, Piers. What you call tradition, I call trauma." The temperature on set visibly shifted. The crowd watching live on the show's stream began flooding social media, with many already predicting the storm that was clearly building. As the interview progressed, Piers became more aggressive. He brought up specific quotes from Harry's memoir, accused him of painting the monarchy in a distorted light, and claimed that the public had grown tired of what he called Harry and Meghan's constant victim narrative. Harry, growing increasingly agitated, replied, "When you've lived it, it's not a narrative, it's reality. You don't get to decide what pain looks like." Piers fired back, "But isn't it convenient that your version of reality always positions you as the wounded hero? The brave prince breaking chains while cashing in on interviews, Netflix deals, and books?" Harry leaned forward, eyes narrowing. "I've used my platform to create dialogue around mental health, trauma, and systemic dysfunction. If that makes you uncomfortable, maybe it's because it holds a mirror up to people like youth who profit from outrage." That line drew audible gasps from the crew behind the cameras. Piers, now visibly annoyed, pressed on. "You talk about mental health and trauma, but what about the trauma you've inflicted on the Queen in her final years? What about your father, your brother? You abandoned them, and in return demanded empathy from the public. How is that not hypocrisy?" Harry shot back. "I didn't abandon anyone. I protected my family from a system that destroyed my mother and was beginning to destroy my wife. If you think speaking out is betrayal, then you haven't learned a damn thing since Diana died." The room froze. Piers momentarily stuttered, then said, "Bringing up your mother is emotional blackmail. You've weaponized grief." Harry's voice rose. "And you've weaponized your platform to bully and belittle anyone who challenges the institution you worship. You don't speak for the people, you speak for tabloids and ratings." The confrontation had crossed into hostile territory. Piers, unwilling to concede ground, decided it was time to escalate further. The next few minutes unraveled rapidly. Piers interrupted Harry repeatedly, raising his voice, dismissing responses before they were finished. Harry, for his part, was no longer calm. He began speaking over Piers, refusing to be steamrolled. "You invited me here to speak, not to be shouted over," Harry snapped. "You don't want a conversation, you want a spectacle." Piers fired back. "Well, if you wanted a therapy session, you should have gone back to Oprah." That was the moment the tension exploded. Harry stood up abruptly. "This isn't journalism, Piers. It's theater. You don't ask questions, you throw accusations. You want to humiliate me to feed your ego?" Piers waved his hand dismissively. "If you can't handle a few tough questions, maybe royalty really isn't your calling." Harry, with a cold expression, said flatly, "You don't get to define what strength looks like." The producer's voice could be heard faintly, telling Piers to move on, but it was already too late. Asterisk at this point. The control room had cut 2 wide shots to minimize the chaos. Piers stood from his chair and walked toward Harry, closing the distance, as if to challenge him further face to face. "I think we're done here," he said smugly, but Harry beat him to it. "I was done the moment you made this about your ego instead of accountability." Security began to appear on the edges of the set, unsure if they needed to intervene. Then, in an unprecedented moment, Piers Morgan turned to the crew and said, "Get him off my stage." The audience watching, Liv barely had time to process the phrase before cameras cut to commercial. But the damage was already done. Harry, visibly furious but holding back from unleashing more, dropped the mic to the floor and walked out. That clip 3 seconds long was replayed endlessly across every platform imaginable. Dissected, mocked, praised, and archived as a cultural moment of clash between modern vulnerability and old-school arrogance. Asterisk within minutes, social media was ablaze. Hashtags like hashtag Harry vs Piers, hashtag Royal Rage, and hashtag Kicked Off Live began trending globally. Twitter descended into chaos, with fans of Harry posting memes of him walking off like a boss, while critics celebrated what they saw as his meltdown. Piers, ever the showman, posted a smug tweet that read, "When you can't defend your actions, walk away. Good riddance." Harry's team, on the other hand, released a single, measured statement. Prince Harry participated in the interview in good faith, but the tone and conduct violated all prior agreements for mutual respect and integrity. News outlets picked up the story instantly. Headlines ran wild. Prince ejected, royal firestorm, Piers pushes too far. Political commentators, royal correspondents, and talk show hosts all added their voices, spinning theories and taking sides. But beneath all the noise, a deeper debate was forming about power, privilege, media ethics, what accountability really means in the public eye. Asterisk Piers Morgan addressed the incident the following evening, opening his show with a smug monologue. "Some people think they're untouchable. They love to preach but can't take a single hard question. That's not courage, that's cowardice." He spent the next 10 minutes dissecting Harry's walkout, framing it as an example of entitlement and fragility. Viewers were divided. Some cheered his defiance, others were disgusted. Meanwhile, Harry remained silent. No social media, no interviews, no leaks, just absence. But it didn't last long. A few days later, he appeared in a quiet video posted to the Arkewell website, standing in a community garden, speaking about a local mental health initiative. Calm, reflective, and focused on solutions rather than drama. No mention of Piers, no reference to the blowout, just the work. The contrast between that quiet resolve and the chaos of the interview only deepened. The public divide. Was Harry above the noise or simply running from accountability? Asterisk, as the dust began to settle, think pieces flooded the internet. Writers from The Guardian to The Atlantic examined the clash, with many highlighting it as a reflection of two very different Britons, one clinging to tradition and performance, the other yearning for vulnerability and truth. Psychologists were invited on air to analyze both men's behavior. Was Piers provoking for ratings or acting out of genuine conviction? Was Harry too thin-skinned, or had he finally stood up for himself in a space that never respected him? The public was left to interpret. For many, the walkout wasn't a sign of weakness, but of boundaries finally. A public figure who knew when to say, enough. For others, it was a failure to engage in the uncomfortable, a refusal to face criticism. Either way, the moment was immortalized in GIFs, recaps, and memories. A prince and a pundit colliding live on air, leaving behind a scorched interview and a national debate. Asterisk in the weeks that followed. Prince Harry resumed his public duties, traveling to charitable events, delivering speeches, and quietly reinforcing the narrative he's worked hard to reclaim, that of a man no longer shackled by duty, but led by purpose. Piers, meanwhile, continued using the incident to drive ratings, revisiting the clash in multiple segments. But as with most media storms, the public moved on. Yet the image of Harry standing up, calling out the performance, and walking away remained burned into the cultural archive. It wasn't just about an argument. It was about what happens when modern vulnerability meets outdated provocation. It was about refusing to be cornered, about understanding when a platform becomes a trap, and about reclaiming dignity, even when the lights are still on. For better or worse, Prince Harry's walkout wasn't a failure, it was a declaration. Whether you agree with it or not, you'll remember it. Because in that studio, with millions watching, he didn't just walk off Piers Morgan's show, he walked into his own power.